So the portions of the aorta are the ascending aorta, the aortic arch, and then the descending aorta, right? So if we do blood as it goes through the aorta, we've actually already done the first part, right? Because the only branches off of the ascending aorta deliver blood to what organ? The heart, right? So remember that we've already done this very first part. The ascending aorta gives rise to coronary arterial circulation, right? Left and right coronary arteries are the only branches off, right? But let's just go ahead and reinforce the fact that the heart is part of systemic circulation. It gets systemic arterial blood, it gets first dibs, and then all of the blood comes back from the heart ultimately into which vessel? Comes back from the heart into which vessel, if you're delivering it, the coronary sinus, right? That makes sense? So we have already done this, but I don't want you to misunderstand and think that it's not part of systemic circulation, because it totally is. So now we're going to do the rest. We're going to, instead of the ascending aorta, which already delivered blood to the heart, now we are going to do the aortic arch. Okay. The aortic arch most of the time has 3 branches off of it. There is variation. For instance, we've got one cadaver on Redwood campus that has 4 branches off of the aortic arch, but most of us have 3. So in almost all of us, the aorta arches left. So it goes over to the left side more than the right side. So listen to this, because this is why you have these 3 branches. That means that in order to get blood over to the right side of the head and the right arm, you need to make a little jog, because it's going left. You with me? So you make a little jog. This little jog is called the Brachiocephalic artery, and you only have one on the right side. Okay? The Brachiocephalic artery will get you over there, and then you can deliver blood to the right side of the head and the right arm. But you don't need to do that from the left side. Do you see? From the left side, you can give blood directly to the left side of the head and the left arm. Does that make sense? Okay, so the 3 branches are the Brachiocephalic artery, also sometimes called the Brachiocephalic trunk. It's the same thing. And then the left common carotid artery, and then the left subclavian that goes under the left clavicle. Does that make sense? Okay, so the aortic arch, therefore, what it's really doing is delivering blood to the head and the arms, right? Isn't that what it's doing, the aortic arch? Okay, so everybody cool with that? So this brachiocephalic, can you see now why it's called the brachiocephalic? Because it's delivering blood to the right side of the head and the right arm. Yeah? Got it? Okay. All right, so you only have brachiocephalic on the right side. Now, by the way, every once in a while somebody doesn't have a brachiocephalic and it goes directly off of the aorta, because, you know, whatever can happen will happen. But note to self, what we're going to do is we're going to deliver blood to the head and then to the arms. Once I get into the branches off the right, so once I get into the common carotids, the arterial flow left and right is the same. Once I get into the subclavians, the arterial flow left and right is the same, right? The only issue is that on the right side, you need to make one extra step before you get over there. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to deliver blood over to the head, and then we'll do arms, okay? So once we get arterial blood supply to the head, it is going to come primarily from the common carotid arteries. And remember, whenever you have a common, it's going to split, okay? So the common carotid arteries are going to run up the neck, right? And then they're going to split. So let's look at a different view, right? So here we go on the right side. So in order to get blood to the right side of the head, I'm going to have to go aortic arch, brachiocephalic artery, and then common carotid. You with me? On the left side, I'm going to have to do what to get there? Aortic arch, left common carotid, right? But once I get there, once I get into the common carotids, it's going to be the same. Everybody good? Okay, so they're called common because they are going to split. This wide space right there when it splits is not labeled, but it's really commonly called the carotid sinus because it's a little wide area. You can feel your pulse really easily in your carotid sinus. Physiologically, it's super duper important because we will see that what the internal carotid artery does is collectively the two of them supply 75% of the blood supply to the brain. So does it make sense to you that you are constantly monitoring pressure right there? You're constantly monitoring oxygen and carbon dioxide content and pH right there to figure out what the brain is going to need. So this thing is really like the gatekeeper right here to the brain. It gets pissed off really easily. It'll make you pass out if it's pissed off. It's like the brain doesn't really play well with others. It's like, I don't care what the hell's going on with the rest of the body. Lay down if I said so. So this is the carotid sinus. So now let's deliver blood to the head. You ready? It's actually really easy if instead of trying to memorize branch points, you look at where it's going. Okay, so this one is going to go to the outside of the head. So this is going to be called the external carotid artery. And what it's going to do is to deliver blood to the skull, the facial muscles, all of the stuff on the outside of the head, right? And it's really easy if you just follow it, right? You've got the common and then follow it to the outside. That's the external. You don't have to know all of the individual arteries that branch off of it, okay? And then this guy right here that dives deep and goes to the inside of the head through a canal that you know is called the internal carotid artery, and it goes through what canal? The carotid canal, exactly. Does that make sense? Okay. Collectively, the two internal carotid arteries, again, are going to deliver 75% of the blood supply to the brain. Those are super duper important, okay? But let's get the rest of the blood supply to the head and the brain. You ready? Okay, so the rest of the blood supply, if we follow this out, this was brachiocephalic, and then this splits off right here, right? And it's the common carotid artery. And now, as we go this way, it's going to be the subclavian. It's going to head under. So it's either branching off of the brachiocephalic or it branched directly off of it. But regardless, once you get into the subclavian, you deliver the rest of the blood supply to the brain from the subclavian artery through these guys right here, which are the vertebral arteries. And they run up the transverse foramina of which vertebra? The cervical vertebra, right? So they're going to run up the transverse foramina. Here's what those are going to do. They're going to run up the transverse foramina of the cervical vertebra, and then they're going to dive anterior to the medulla oblongata, and then they're going to run up the foramen magnum. Does that make sense? And they'll deliver collectively, the two of them, the other 25% of the blood supply of the brain. Okay? All right, so let's look at it from a different view. We looked at this one last time, but let's reinforce this. Ready? Okay, so that means that the blood supply to your brain is going to come collectively from these two, which are the internal carotid arteries that went up the carotid canal, yeah, and then came in right near your hypothalamus, right? And then these two right here, which are the vertebral arteries, which ran up the transverse foramina. What artery were they in before they became the vertebral? Subclavian to vertebral. Does that make sense? Up the transverse foramina, anterior, and then anterior to the medulla oblongata through the foramen magnum. Good? Okay. And all of these little arteries have individual names. We don't make you learn them. These arteries right here are a great example of collateral circulation, right? That's what we talked about last time. And by the way, this artery right here, you know how the pons has like cleavage in the middle? It's because that lays right in the middle. That's called the basilar artery. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is the cerebral arterial circle, or the circle of Willis. And here's another imaging that you can actually identify. You can see that once you actually know the basic anatomy, you can identify, like, what vessel is that? Brachiocephalic. What is this one? Right, vertebral artery, exactly, right? Does that make sense? And you can see it coming together, and then that would be the basilar right there in the pons. Does that make sense? So you can actually see these with imaging. So all they do is they stick a fluorescent dye into your arteries and let it go through so that you can actually see where the arteries are. And that's sometimes how they do that intervention surgery. Like the one that I had, they stuffed dye up there so they could see all the vessels. And then they like stuck a little camera all the way up here and then shut it down. So it's kind of cool. I got to watch the whole thing until he got to my brain. And then he wouldn't let me watch anymore. Okay, so we just delivered blood supply pretty much to the head. Everybody good? So now what we're going to do is to deliver the blood back from the head to the heart. Does that make sense? Okay, so we are going to go to all of those capillary beds. and we are going to deliver it back. But before we get all the way back, let me just tell you a big picture understanding that some of you guys have and some of you don't yet. Ultimately, all of the blood back from the head is going to come into the superior vena cava, right? Yeah? So, and the superior vena cava is formed by uniting two vessels called the right and left brachiocephalic veins. And that's different because, of course, when you're talking about arteries, you only have a brachiocephalic artery on the what side? Right side. But you have right and left brachiocephalic veins. You with me? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to gather all the blood up from the head, right? Then we're going to dump it into the brachiocephalic vein, and then it's going to go into the superior vena cava. Does that make sense? Okay, so how are we going to do that? Basically, this is going to go back to some stuff that you've learned before. So all of what we call the dural venous sinuses, yeah, are all going to collectively dump into the internal jugular vein that goes through another hole that you know. Jugular foramen, exactly. Now, what I don't have you guys do, because the drainage through the dural venous sinuses is a little confusing, is have you know specific drainage through the dural venous sinuses. There's also a lot of redundancy in those. So collectively, all of the dural venous sinuses are going to drain the brain, including cerebrospinal fluid from the brain, remember that? And then if you're interested, although I don't usually ask, the last sinus that they hit is the sigmoid sinus before they dump into the internal jugular vein. Let's look at a different figure. This one's from the atlas that we use in lab. Do you see this? So they're all going to collectively dump into the sigmoid sinus and then into the internal jugular vein. Does that make sense? So the internal jugular vein is going to drain most of the blood from the brain, right? And so let's look at where the internal jugular vein is going to end up. So, ready? So now let's follow it. See, you don't even really need to know which one it is, because if you follow it from the inside of the head and it's really huge, that's the internal jugular vein. Yes? And it's going to dump into the subclavian. Let me tell you guys something. It does not change names, and this is important about veins. Veins usually change names after they have gathered other veins. So this is not called the brachiocephalic vein until it has gathered everything from the cephalic and everything from the brachio. And then it's brachiocephalic, okay? So this will gather everything from the arm, and after I gather everything from the head, then it's brachiocephalic vein. Okay, so let's pick up the other parts of the head and drain the other parts of the head. So now we need to drain the outside of the head. That one's not hard either. If you just follow the vessel that goes from the outside of the head, you will find the external jugular vein. Yes? Okay, just follow it from the outside of the head. Now, where does it dump? It's a vein. It dumps anywhere it damn well pleases, honestly. So does sometimes the external jugular dump further in than you expected? Yeah, right? Does sometimes it dump before the vertebral and sometimes after? Yeah, it does whatever the hell it wants. That's why you don't label it at a branch point. You always follow it, right? You're like, hey, where is this coming from? Okay. So, and then the other part that we have to gather is the last 25% of the blood supply, right? So this is the vertebral vein, yeah? And the vertebral vein runs with the vertebral artery in the transverse foramina, right? It runs right with them. Okay, so after I have gathered up internal jugular vein, vertebral vein, and external jugular vein, and everything from the arm, then this is brachiocephalic. Got it? Okay. Now, this picture right here is where about 60% of them dump, but they like really just kind of dump wherever they want. Like there's really no like 1, 2, and 3 that they have to be. Okay, everybody good with that? All right, so luckily in lecture I like test you from images from the textbook, but I'm just telling you that when you're in lab and you're actually looking at a cadaver, you have to follow the vessels to figure out which one it actually is. Okay, so now we have delivered all of the blood to and from the head, right? To and from the head. And so the next thing we're going to do is to and from the arm. Does that make sense? So what artery are we going to use to get to the arm? Subclavian, exactly. And so subclavian, you either get through the brachiocephalic if you're on the right side or directly off the aortic arch if you're on the left side, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's go subclavian. So if we follow the subclavian out, it is so freaking easy. Arterial supply to the arm, I promise you it's easy. It's like you will even think that it's easy. And I know I always say that in anatomy, but some things are easy. Okay, so here we go. We are subclavian as we go under the clavicle. When we get in the armpit region, we're going to be called axillary. When we are in the arm region, we are going to be called brachial. When we go on the lateral surface, we're going to be called radial. And the medial surface, we're going to be called ulnar. Exactly. And then when you get down to the hands, what happens is you have two arches. One's deep and one's superficial. I don't make you distinguish between the two of them because A, they're really hard to dissect out in the cadaver, and B, it's really hard on like a 2D black and white test for you to tell which one's deep and superficial. But let me just tell you, there are two arches, yeah? And they are anastomoses between the radial and the ulnar arteries, yeah? And then they give rise to the digital arteries that supply like the entire like rest of your hand, yeah? So if you have like a pinprick, right, on your finger to get blood out, if you're a diabetic or you're testing something, what you were doing is you were getting blood that was supplied from the radial, from the digital arteries. Does that make sense? So the digital arteries that go to your fingers. Does that make sense? So it's so easy. Like this part is like exactly what you would think that they would be called. So arterial flow through the arm is super easy. There are, of course, a few more arteries. We don't make you learn all of them. Now, the venous drainage back is a little harder because there are always more veins than arteries. And there are superficial veins when there are not superficial arteries, in most people anyway. Arteries are not a good thing to keep on the surface. Yeah? Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to do superficial drainage and deep drainage. Here's the problem with this. Even though they color code them light blue versus dark blue, it still is kind of hard to see the difference between them. So I think a better place to see this would be either on the cadaver or for the hand ones, we've got those $4,000 Wireman models. You can see any vessel on those that you want to. You can see the two loops, you can see everything. Okay, so let's do superficial drainage of the upper limb, and then we'll do deep drainage of the upper limb. The superficial drainage is the one that's a little bit harder. Okay, so superficial veins in this image are represented as the lighter blue. It's going to be kind of hard to see them, but do you see that arch that's a little further back there? And of course, you know that on the backs of your hands, there's more superficial veins, right, than there are on the palms of your hands, right? So there's a whole superficial venous network on the back, and it's kind of variable between people. Some people can even see the arch on the back of their hand. Mine isn't very archy. Either way, what you've got is this superficial veins. And this guy on the back right there is on the dorsal surface of your hand. So you've got digital veins. I don't know why they didn't label them because obviously those are digital veins, right? They were digital arteries. And then they go into the arches, right? The arch that's on the back side is more superficial than the arch that's on the front side, okay? But ultimately what you are going to do is you are going to follow them up and you are going to end up in a basilic vein if you're on the medial and a cephalic vein if you're on the lateral. So watch. So follow them up. Do you see this big vessel right here? This is the basilic vein. It runs up the entire medial surface of your arm. And this guy right here on this side, this is the cephalic vein, and it runs up the entire lateral surface. Does that make sense? Okay, so basilic and cephalic, BC, I always remember it because basilic are closer to your boobs. And you're not going to forget it. I was like, always like BC, and then people were like, well, which, do you go BC in what order? Boobs. That's how you remember, okay? So basilic and cephalic, right? Okay, so where do those dump? Wherever the hell they want, honestly, because it doesn't matter with veins, but the general pattern is that this basilic usually dumps either into your brachial or into your axillary, but just call it basilic until it dumps, right? Okay, and this cephalic usually dumps either into your axillary or sometimes it even goes into your subclavian. But again, just call it cephalic until it dumps, right? There's a lot of variation as to where it actually branches and where it dumps. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, now the only other thing that you need to know is that there is an anastomosis here that is clinically important, right? Almost all of us have had a blood draw or an IV right there, okay? Now, there's two really common variations of this. If you've just got one that goes from one side to the other, it's called the median cubital vein, and I think that's what I have on this side. But if you have two, like the Weiermann models actually have two instead of one, then it's not very confusing, because either you have a median basilic that joins with a median cephalic. So you've got kind of a point instead of just a slash, but the basilic is on the basilic side and the cephalic is on the cephalic side, right? So it's just a little bit of individual variation. I won't ask you that about that in lecture, but do know that when you look at the Weiermann models and also some of the cadavers, it's you've got two in the middle instead of one. It's a really common variation. Okay, so what these are ultimately going to do is gather that superficial blood. Ultimately, all of that superficial blood is going to end up in the subclavian vein, right? Okay, but now we have to do the deep drainage, and the deep drainage is super duper easy. So the deep drainage, basically we've got some more digital veins, right? And they're going to dump into a different arch that is not as close to the backside. I don't make you distinguish between the arches. And then if you follow those up, on the medial side, you will have two deep ulnar veins that run with the ulnar artery. You only have one ulnar artery, you've got two deep ulnar veins. Do you see them? These guys right here? Okay, right there. Okay, and you've got two deep radial veins that run with the radial artery, usually 2 and 2. Okay, now, as they go past the elbow, they usually resolve into 1 and 1. But sometimes it happens at different points. So as you go past the elbow, usually it becomes paired brachial veins. So regardless, if you're past the elbow, call it a brachial vein, okay? So these are paired brachial veins. And then the brachial veins come together wherever they damn well please. And then they are going to unite with these other two, ultimately, yeah? And then after all three have united, you're generally in the subclavian vein. Does that make sense? Okay, so what I want you to understand about me is that these different venous variations, they're not particularly meaningful. They're just like little individual variations, like on the external surface of a person. So I don't usually nitpick you about variations that are not anatomically or physiologically meaningful, right? So if you told me that this one dumped into either the brachial or the axillary or the subclavian, I'm not going to write a question like that because all three of them are potentially right, and I don't want to spend like 4 hours arguing about test questions. I'm smarter than that. So I will write you something that is a little more consistent to grade, okay? All right, so you got it? So ultimately, what we are going to do is, again, just to reinforce, after we have gathered up everything from the arm, yeah, and everything from the head, we are in what vein? Brachiocephalic. And then the two brachiocephalic unite to form the superior vena cava, right? Okay. All right. So now we're going to do descending aorta. You ready? So as we go into the descending aorta, the first thing that we have to do is deliver blood. Oh, crap, I lost it again. Deliver blood to the thorax, but we've already taken care of most of the thorax, right? Because we already delivered almost all the blood we needed to the lungs, and we already did the heart. There's not a whole hell of a lot left to give blood to in the thorax. So the descending thoracic aorta actually has fewer branches off of it than you expect, and they're actually tinier. The primary branches off the thoracic, the descending thoracic aorta, are the intercostal arteries that go and deliver blood to the intercostal muscles and the intercostal spaces. Do you see them? Now, there are 3 different ones, but again, it's really hard to tell in a 2D picture. You do have anterior, posterior, and internal, but for now, just these are thoracic. These are intercostal arteries. Right, intercostal arteries. Now, there's 2 other arteries that come off of here that are not shown in the picture, but are functionally important, so I want you to understand them. Ready? Those 2 are the esophageal arteries. I mean, isn't that where you would deliver blood to the esophagus from the descending thoracic aorta? And the esophagus is, of course, a systemic organ, and it needs oxygenated blood, yeah? Okay. And then the other ones that aren't shown here, but are kind of conceptually important, are called the bronchial arteries that deliver the blood to the parts of the lungs that don't do gas exchange with the air, like the outer surfaces and the bronchi and bronchioles, right? They're not doing gas exchange because they're not actually the alveoli. So even though it's kind of counterintuitive, the lungs actually receive, yes, mostly pulmonary blood, but then the outer portions receive systemic blood. Does that make sense? And it's not drawn on any of the pictures in your textbook, but you can understand that they exist. Okay? Everybody good? All right. So, oh, you know what? I forgot to do that in the other class. Silly me. I have to go back and fix that up. Oh, venous drainage of the thoracic cavity. I forgot to do that in the other class. Okay, so the venous drainage of the thoracic cavity, everybody hates it. The names are weird and the pattern is a little hard. It's not as bad after you get through it once. But here's the issue that you have to deal with venous drainage. Venous drainage in the thoracic cavity, the vast majority of it is going to go into the superior vena cava. But here's the issue. The superior vena cava is over to the right side, just like the aorta is over to the left side. So in order to get from the left side over, you have to make a couple little jogs to get over there. Does that make sense? So the jogs are kind of weird and a little hard to see. They're easy to see on the Wireman models, but I'm gonna run you guys through them. Okay. So ultimately, we're going to take blood back from all of the intercostal arteries, and we want it to end up in the superior vena cava. You good with that? Okay. So if we are going over from the right side, we can go relatively directly, but not completely directly. So here are intercostal veins, yeah? And what those are going to do is those are going to wrap around and dump into this vein. This vein is called the Azygous vein, azygous, like unpaired, like a zygote is two things put together. This is azygous, as in there's not two of them, okay? And blood through the Azygous vein, watch guys, it's going to go up and dump into the superior vena cava. Got it? That's right side. So intercostal veins, Azygous veins, superior vena cava. The left side can't do it that way. It's going to have to make a couple of jogs before it gets there. You ready? All right. So over here, over on the left side, you still got your intercostal veins, but they are going to dump into this guy. The top ones are going to dump into this guy, which is called the accessory hemiazygous vein, which is going to dump into the azygous into the superior vena cava. But the lower ones are going to do something different. Ready? Intercostal veins, hemiazygous. This one ducks behind, dumps into the azygous superior vena cava.
Why wouldn't it just go into the inferior vena cava?
It doesn't. I don't know. Seems like it would have evolved that way, but it doesn't. I mean, every once in a while it does, but hardly ever. Okay. That's a good question. I've always wondered that too. Because they're pretty much the same damn tube, honestly. Probably the way it developed as we stretched out and became longer. Okay, so one more time with the left side. Either way, start out in an intercostal vein, right? If you're in an upper intercostal vein, then you go into the accessory hemiazygous. Watch the direction of flow. Over, down, over, up into the azygous, right? Into the superior vena cava. On this side, lower ribs, intercostal vein, hemiazygous, duck behind, azygous, superior vena cava. So it's a nuisance. I don't like it either. And it's always kind of hard to see them because they're actually kind of on top of each other. So if I were you, I would draw lines as you go through this on your textbook, right? And then go find them on the Wireman model because you can follow them on the Wireman model really easy. You've got all of it that you can see. Okay, so now we get to the interesting part. You guys ready? This is the part where sometimes it really helps to have somebody show it to you. So we are still going to be descending aorta, but when you go through, keep doing that. When you go through the diaphragm, you become the abdominal aorta. Descending abdominal or abdominal descending doesn't really make much difference. Okay, so with the abdominal aorta, what you have is some branches that are obvious and some branches that are less obvious, okay? The branches that are a little confusing to people, there is a mnemonic to remember them. These three right here, we're going to go through these today. These three are a little hard for people to figure out what they're doing and where they're going. So the mnemonic for these three is CSI, okay? And this is celiac trunk, superior mesenteric artery, and inferior mesenteric artery. Watch, CSI. The others are really obvious. So let's get the obvious ones out of the way. You ready? The obvious ones, what would you call this artery right here? Me too. I would call that the renal artery, okay? If you miss the renal artery, I don't know what the hell you've been doing with your time. So these are renal arteries, so those are super obvious. These guys right here that deliver blood to the adrenal or suprarenal glands are called the suprarenal arteries. Don't worry about this one. Sometimes it dives through the diaphragm and back out. It doesn't really matter. It's still the suprarenal artery. Good. And then the only other ones that you have to worry about are these two right here that are called the gonadal arteries, unless you know the sex. If you know the sex of the person, they are called ovarian arteries in a female and testicular arteries in a male. Does that make sense? And of course, in one sex, they're going to be longer arteries. Which one? The male, because the testicles are no longer in the abdominal pelvic cavity, right? So they're going to fall. But these are the same. So those are the three easy ones, right? Suprarenal, renal, gonadal, right? And so then we just have to take care of these that are more complicated. And this is the one that probably confuses people the most. So let's take some time and make sure you understand it. You ready? So this one is called the celiac trunk. Let's look at what it does. Okay, so we're going to blow it up with this picture right here. Do you see it? It is the first branch, the first big branch below the diaphragm off of the aorta, right? So that's always how you can find it. First branch off of the aorta under the diaphragm. So this is the celiac trunk, okay? And of course, this one is the S. We're not going to do that one right now, but we'll do it second. And then there's going to be an I down there, right? So this is my celiac trunk. Here's how I want you guys to think about the celiac trunk. You need to think about not just what the names of the vessels are, but what they're doing. Like what organs are you supplying blood to from the celiac trunk? Okay, and then they are not confusing. Okay, so the celiac trunk is going to have some branches that come directly off of it, but they're not hard. So watch this one. This branch right here dives back behind and goes to this organ called the spleen. What would you name that one? Splenic. That is the splenic artery, right? So you never try to name it until you have followed it to its destination, because then you're just making it impossible for yourself, okay? And then this one right here wraps around the lesser curvature of the stomach from the left side. So we call this one the left gastric artery. Is that okay? Splenic, left gastric. Got it? Okay. Then I've got one other branch, but this branch is going to branch a lot, so we're going to call it a common. Yeah. This branch right here is called the common hepatic. It delivers blood to the liver, of course, but to a bunch of other things as well. So this is the common hepatic artery. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So we have so far delivered blood to what two organs? Spleen and the stomach. Okay, so now we're going to have to take care of a bunch of other organs that are just under the diaphragm. Yes? Okay, so the common hepatic is going to split again. Watch where it goes. Ready? Common hepatic is going to split to this one right here that goes around the lesser curvature of the stomach from the right side. What would you call that one? Right gastric artery. That's what I would call it too. Okay? And then it's going to split into this one that delivers blood to the rest of the stomach, but also to the first portion of the small intestine called the duodenum. And this one is called the gastroduodenal artery. Does that make sense to you? Gastroduodenal artery. So gastroduodenal artery is right here. So you don't have to label it after it branches. It's got another name, but this is gastroduodenal. Good? Okay, and then all we have to do is deliver blood actually to the liver, right? We got it almost to the liver, but not quite. So this guy right here is called the hepatic artery proper. going to the liver, or the proper hepatic artery. Nobody can decide which order those names go in, and I don't care. Okay, so make sense? One more time. Want to go through it one more time? Okay. Okay. What is this whole big artery called? Celiac trunk. Exactly. And I'm not going to do it in the same order this time. I'm going to let you guys figure out the names of the arteries by any order that I decide. Okay. So this artery right here is going to this organ. What are you going to call it? Splenic artery. Yeah. This artery right here is delivering blood not just to the liver but other organs. What are you going to call it? Common hepatic artery. Yeah. And this artery right here is delivering blood to the left side of the top of the stomach. What are you going to call it? Left gastric artery. Does that make sense? Okay. And then once we get down to the common hepatic and we watch it branch, we can see what that one does. This branch of the common hepatic is going to the stomach and the first portion of the small intestine. What are you going to call it? Gastroduodenal. This one is delivering blood to the right side of the top of the stomach. What are you going to call it? Right gastric. And then this one is delivering blood actually to the liver. And you're going to call it hepatic artery proper or proper hepatic artery. Good? Right. So do you see that if you follow and think about what you're supplying, this is not as hard as it originally seems? Yes? So never ever label an artery by memorizing a point. Always use your brain and follow it to where it's going. And then you're like, I wonder what I would call that one. Splenic. Oh, okay, I got it. Okay. Okay, so everybody good with celiac trunk? Okay. There are a couple other branches of the celiac trunk, but we don't make you learn them. I mean, a couple of other branches off of the common hepatic. Okay, so we already did suprarenal, renal, and gonadal. Let's pick up the S in CSI. Let's remind you where we were. Okay, so we just did C, yeah? S, superior mesenteric, is the next one we're going to do. So let's see what's in the superior mesenteric. It's not very hard either. The superior mesenteric, here's the celiac trunk, what's left of it. They cut it off so that you could see all of the rest of the organs. And then this is the superior mesenteric, but they actually cut off most of what the superior mesenteric supplies because you can't see a damn thing if the small intestine's in there because it's like so big. So here's what the superior mesenteric supplies. So we have already supplied quite a few things in the abdominopelvic cavity, right? We've already supplied stomach, liver, right, spleen, a little teeny bit of the small intestine. Now let's supply the rest of the stuff in order. And the rest of the stuff in order is that this superior mesenteric artery is going to run through the mesentery, yeah, to supply the rest of the small intestine, right? The entire rest of the small intestine, yes? And the proximal portions of the large intestine. And I don't know if you know the order that the large intestine goes in. The order that food goes through it is ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon. So the first place that the food would go after the small intestine would be ascending colon and then transverse colon. So it supplies the entire rest of the small intestine with the superior mesenteric artery, and then the ascending and transverse colon. Does that make sense? And you can kind of see it on this picture that it is supplying, you can't see the small intestine, but you can see it supplying the ascending and transverse colon. Do you see that? And then what is going to supply the rest of the colon? What's going to be, yeah, the inferior mesenteric, right? The inferior mesenteric artery right there is going to be the I in CSI, yeah? And it is going to supply the rest of the digestive tract, right? So the descending and sigmoid colon and a little bit of the rectum, not all of it, but a little bit of the rectum. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So everybody good? So we just supplied almost everything that we can think of in the abdominopelvic cavity. Actually, we haven't done the pelvic cavity, in the abdominal cavity yet. So what we have to do is drain it, okay? But the drainage pattern is weird, and it's weird for a good reason. So in this particular instance, the weird is something that I will test you over. But let me show you what's going to happen. So let's do the easy parts first, the easy parts of venous drainage, okay? So the easy parts of venous drainage are not the digestive tract. Please note that you don't see any of those digestive veins going directly in there, and there's a reason for that. Okay, the easy parts are renal, suprarenal and gonadal again. Okay, so the renal goes straight in. They're super duper easy to find, straight into the inferior vena cava. The suprarenal either goes straight into the inferior vena cava or into the renal, and I don't care because it's pretty variable in people, honestly. Usually on the left side they go into the renal, but sometimes they don't. Whatever. And then the gonadals. Gonadals usually on the right side they go directly in, and then on the left side they go into the renals. But again, this is just an anomaly. It's not particularly important, okay? But it does do that generally. Okay. But then you have not drained any of those digestive organs that we just supplied directly into the inferior vena cava. And there's a good reason. I need you guys to try to conceptualize and understand that reason. So the digestive organs are all doing at least a little bit of absorption. Your stomach doesn't do much absorption, but it does absorb a couple things. And your small intestine does most of the absorption, and your large intestine does some absorption as well, okay? The stuff that you eat and drink is not sterile. It's very, very likely to contain pathogens and toxins that need to be detoxified. So what is going to happen is all of that stuff collectively from those capillary beds, instead of dumping it directly into the inferior vena cava and back into circulation, you are going to send it through a cleansing organ before you dump it. Directly, before you dump it into circulation. So which organ do you send it to? The liver, exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to gather everything and send it through the liver before we send it back into circulation, which means the circulation pattern is going to look weird but be pretty damn important. Yes? Okay. So what is going to happen is we're going to send it through what we call hepatic portal circulation. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so all of this is going on behind, but they ghosted most of it so you really wouldn't get confused. And then what's really we're going to look at is this. Okay, so what's going to happen here, it looks like a total mess, but it will resolve if you just give me a second. Okay, what's going to happen is everything that I gathered up from small intestine, large intestine, stomach, and spleen is going to get dumped into and go through the liver, bottom to top, before it gets dumped into the inferior vena cava. Are you with me? Big picture of what's going on there? And then we'll add details and we'll sort of understand why it's doing that and what the names of the vessels are, okay? All right, so here we go. We're going to draw it. Do you see in this figure, do you see a chair? Back of the chair, seat of the chair, front of the chair? If you don't, do you see it now? Okay. So, all right. So let's define our chair. Okay, you ready? And let's tell you what's going on there. You ready? So we've got this. Oops. So we have a chair. Can you find how that correlates to that? Okay. So, and I want the liver to be the pillow on the top of the chair. Got it? Okay. We're going to name all of the vessels. On top of the pillow, I have another couple of vessels that I'm going to name. We'll get those last. Okay, so again, we're going to think about it functionally instead of just naming the vessels. What we need to do is we need to drain blood from the small intestine, the large intestine, the stomach, and the spleen. We're going to gather it all up. We're going to send it through the liver capillaries. Who remembers what was special about the liver capillaries that will allow them to, for instance, cleanse funky stuff out of blood? Go ahead.
Isn't it sinusoid?
Yeah, sinusoid. Wide sinusoid capillaries with holes in them. And remember me telling you that they had macrophages, big old like immune cells looking to gather funky stuff out of there. So we're going to send it through this really slow, wavy capillary bed as it goes from bottom to the top of the liver. And hopefully at that point it will be cleansed before you dump it back into the inferior vena cava. Got the big picture? Okay, all right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to name these vessels, but instead of trying to memorize them, I'm going to try to figure out where they're draining, right? And then name them that way. Look at this guy. Front leg is coming from the descending and sigmoid colon. Before I tell you, you guess what its name is.
Mesenteric.
Yeah, that's, so what was the name of the artery that supplied the descending and sigmoid colon? Inferior mesenteric artery. What is the name of the vein that drains the descending insect? Does that make sense to you? Okay. So this is the inferior mesenteric vein. Which direction is blood going through it? Up. Yeah? Okay. This one isn't showing you everything, but showing you a little bit, and I can tell you the rest. You ready? Oops. What happened? Okay. All right, so do you see this guy? So I'm going to tell you what's missing. This guy right here is draining almost the entire small intestine and the proximal portions of the large intestine. This guy? And it's making the back leg of the chair. What would you call it? Yeah, that is the superior mesenteric vein. Does that make sense? And blood's going up through that. Does that make sense? Okay. And then the seat, right? The seat of the chair, right here. Where's it coming from? Follow it. It's coming from the spleen. What would you call that one? Yeah, that's the splenic vein. Okay. They all gather together in a vein that you haven't met yet. Let me explain to you, well, let me tell you what its name is. This vein is the hepatic portal vein, but I need to explain to you what a portal vein is so that you'll understand the function of that one. Okay, portal veins are weird and they're not very common. People argue about whether we have one or two or three in the human body. And they break the rules of circulation. The rules of circulation are generally that you go heart, artery, arterioles, capillary, venule, veins, heart. But a portal vessel breaks that rule, and what it does is puts capillary beds in series. So here's what it's going to do. Heart, arteries, arterioles, capillary beds, portal vessel, capillary beds, venules, veins, heart. So what it does is it gathers everything from all of those capillary beds, and instead of sending it back into circulation, it sends it through a second capillary bed. Does that make sense? So a portal vein is really about shunting blood directly from one capillary group to another, right? Does it make sense to you that you would want to do this in this situation? You would want to gather everything from those digestive capillary beds and then send them through the liver capillary bed so that you can cleanse it, monitor it, before you send it back into circulation. So that is a portal vein, okay? So the hepatic portal vein is going to deliver blood to the liver. Which direction is blood going through it? Yeah, and isn't this weird? Because you don't generally deliver blood from a vein to a capillary bed, right? Generally, veins leave capillary beds, right? So this is an exception to that rule. So here's what's going to happen. All this blood was gathered up, goes that direction through the splenic vein, and then it percolates through those sinusoid capillaries in the liver from the bottom to the top. By the time you get to the top, if you've got a healthy liver, even if you ate E. coli on spinach leaf on accident, in all likelihood you won't even get sick. Sometimes you do, depends on how much E. coli and how good you were at catching it. So by the time you get to the top, what is going to happen is the blood should be clean, yes? And you are going to, at the top, dump it into two veins called the hepatic veins. And you've got two of them. You've got a left one and a right one. And the hepatic veins are going to dump into what? Yeah, inferior vena cava. Got it? That makes sense? Okay, let me tell you one player that doesn't make sense to some people, and then talk about a couple other vessels that I don't make you memorize. Why is the spleen part of this story? Because the spleen is not an absorptive organ, okay? Well, first of all, most of us didn't learn a damn thing about the spleen when we learned anatomy anyway. I literally didn't even know what it did until college. They're like, oh, and you got a spleen. And because it does about 12 different things and most people don't understand it. But I can tell you one of them that is relevant to this story, which will make it make sense. So I'm gathering up funky stuff potentially from here and funky stuff potentially from here. And the spleen is part of your immune system. And what it's responsible for doing is responding to pathogens by producing antibodies and white blood cells. So the metaphor that works for me here is that you're gathering up potential enemy agents, yes? And then you are sending in the troops, yes? And they are all going to go through the capillary beds together. So you're sending in a whole bunch of white blood cells and antibodies from the spleen in there. Does that make sense? That's why it's part of that story, okay? The only other thing that I didn't address is that the stomach, can you see that the stomach drains into this as well? Yeah, I don't usually make you memorize those, but I just wanted to make sure the story was complete. So there are a couple of vessels that you could have to memorize that are part of this story, but they're really hard to find, so I don't usually make you memorize them. But basically, I'm telling you that the story is complete. Everything that does absorption goes into hepatic portal circulation. Yeah, go ahead.
Even the gallbladder, right?
The gallbladder, yeah, it does go into hepatic portal circulation. Yep, not bile, but blood. Yeah, from the gallbladder. Yeah. That make sense? Okay. So with the hepatic portal circulation, first off, got to tell you that I like it. Note to self. And second, I want to tell you that I want you to be able to evaluate it, and I want you to do a thinking experiment on your own. And if you really kind of understand both the structure and the function, you will be able to do this. So here's my challenge to you before your test. I want you to think about this. It might end up as a bonus question, or part of it might actually end up as a question on the test, or maybe even both, okay? And I want you to compare 3 things in 3 different vessels, right? So before you write it down, make sure you understand it. Ready? I want you to look at oxygen content, high, low, medium, whatever, okay? Nutrient content, high, low, medium. Toxin, pathogen content, again, yeah, in 3 different vessels. The hepatic artery proper, the hepatic portal vein, and the hepatic veins. Because the liver is weird, because look what it does. The liver gets blood from 2 different sources. So listen up for just a second. Doesn't the liver get systemic arterial blood? It does, and it needs it. Yeah? It's a systemic organ, and it needs what? It needs oxygen, yeah? Okay, so it needs oxygen. But in addition, the liver is also delivered venous blood. Yeah? Both from the underside, yeah? And the venous blood is not delivering oxygen, but it's actually delivering the liver's work, yeah? Okay, so it's delivering the liver's work. Now, are there 2 separate capillary beds? No, they're actually all one capillary bed. One big capillary bed in which you mix all of the antibodies from the spleen, all the potential toxins and pathogens. You mix the oxygen with the carbon dioxide, and it all percolates through the liver. And then the gas content, the nutrient content, everything changes as you get into the hepatic veins. Does that make sense? So if you sit and think about that, it will make you not just memorize hepatic portal circulation, but try to critically evaluate whether you get what's happening. Okay? Got it? Okay. Does anybody have any questions about this? Everybody good? Okay, you sure? Okay. All right, so that is venous drainage of the abdomen. We did all of that. Note, one last little note, and that last little note is that there are no valves in the entire venous drainage of the abdominal pelvic cavity. Can anybody remind me why that is? Go ahead.
Because when you breathe, it compresses.
The respiratory pump makes it unnecessary, right? Because you change the pressure all the time. Okay, so let's just do arterial supply to the pelvis and lower limbs. It's super easy, and then I'll let you guys go. Okay. Blood flow through the lower limbs. So here we go. We were moving down. Okay, so when we get to the bottom of the aorta, it splits. Yes? And it splits into the left and right common iliac arteries. Okay? They are iliac for what reason? Passing by the ilium, and they are common because they're going to split. Okay? And so if you are delivering blood to the leg, you are going to split into the external iliac artery, and then follow it down. It's really easy. Okay, so, and then if you're going to the junk, you're going to urinary bladder, uterus, vagina, vas deferens, you are going to split from the internal iliac artery. So I hate this picture, but it kind of shows you what's going on. This guy right here is the internal iliac artery, and it stays inside, okay? And primarily what it's doing is delivering blood mostly to the pelvic cavity, yeah? Because with that whole story that we just told, we didn't really deliver blood to the urinary bladder. We didn't deliver it to the uterus. Does that make sense? So that's primarily what this one is doing. But that picture is really stupid, so I'll show you a different picture. So this is the internal iliac artery right there, okay? And then the external iliac goes primarily to the thigh and the leg. Let's just follow that one real quick. Okay, so external iliac artery is super easy. Goes through the thigh, it's called the femoral. Dives behind the knee, you call it the popliteal, yeah? And then it's going to split off into the anterior and posterior tibial, and then you're going to have a fibular, which is going to go lateral. It'll be super easy. Just watch. Ready? Okay. So as we go common iliac here, and then we split, right? And then we become external iliac. We go through the inguinal canal. We become femoral, right? So the big artery going through there. The femoral dives behind the knee, and it becomes the popliteal, right? And then the popliteal, if you continue it, you can see that it splits into an anterior and a posterior tibial. The one that's behind the tibia is posterior. The one that goes in front of the tibia is anterior, yes? And then you will have a branch usually off of the posterior that goes lateral, and that one's called the fibular. Like, could that be any easier? It ain't hard. And not that we make you learn these, but notice that the blood supply to the foot is pretty similar to the blood supply to the hand. You've got a couple of arches and then some digital arteries, right? That's how that works, okay? Last thing is we're just going to deliver the venous drainage back. And you've got superficial and deep, but even the superficial and deep is really easy, okay? Oh, shoot. Actually, I'll just let you guys go because I don't have that picture pulled up. We'll do the venous drainage, and the last thing we have is fetal circulation next time. But will you please bring both lymphatic and blood notes, because I haven't decided which one I want to do on Thursday. Neither one of them is going to be on your test. It's Tuesday. Your Tuesday material ends at this set of notes, okay? And you will have a quiz over the weekend, a take-home quiz.